You lied. You deceived me. Yes. And now our countries are in ruins. Our status, gone. Indeed. Why? The fate of humanity should not be in the hands of our governments. Truthfully, it is better that greed is set aside concerning the Singularity Testament. Seriously, after 2 global wars, you're now worried about the ethical dilemma of this. Unbelievable. The prophecy is playing out right before our eyes. The meteor has fallen, just as predicted. It won't be long. A choice will have to be made, but not by us. Correct. The Assembly will pursue us until the end of time. Good luck, old friend.
So today we're going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 85 of the series, and in the previous episode we saw the conclusion of the War of the Elites, aka World War V, with both America and China experiencing large revolutions that overthrew both governments and led to multiple states/factions within breaking away. We also saw the peace treaty do some other things. That includes the partitioning of Brazil, and then there was also some major border changes that happened over here in Europe. So if you guys do enjoy today's episode, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We have just reached 200,000 subscribers. If you didn't see the live stream, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, I'm just joking. And third of all, it's okay. There will be a video coming out this Monday to talk about all the celebratory things that are going to be happening with that. So do stay tuned for that. But I do want to mention just one of those things here, and that is that there's going to be Wixo merch coming out. So I know some of you guys have been requesting that, and I've figured out a way to kind of make it work. So we're going to try to. Trust me, I'll let you know when it comes out. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump straight into this video. So in the previous video, like I said, World War V ended, and we're left with this kind of new world map. A majority of countries in the world are now in the Assembly of Nations, which no longer has a Security Council that has been reinforced by the peace treaty of World War V. So every single nation in the Assembly of Nations is completely even. America has just as much power as the country of Orange Afghanistan, and they have just as much power as their southern neighbor of India. Previously, the Security Council kind of gave their members a little bit of a nudge over them because they too could vote on things. It was kind of like a bicameral legislative thing. The General Assembly could pass something and then the Security Council could veto it, so they no longer have that veto power, and that's pretty huge. Now it's just a popular vote by the entire Assembly. The fact that the Security Council has been abolished means there's going to be more and more countries that are comfortable with joining this Assembly, including these 2 Southern African countries, as well as, and finally, the Purple Team. I kind of feel like Palestine was already in the Assembly, but if not, then they're going to join. Even this communist purple country will join. They're the first communist country to be in this Assembly, I believe. And on the topic of communist country, we also see that this Russian communist country joins as well. So yeah, like I was saying, a majority of countries in the world are now represented in the Assembly. And as for post-World War V, the world is going to be going into a rebuild period. Now, I did talk about this at the end of the previous episode, but it was at the end of the previous episode, which was like 40 minutes long. So to kind of reiterate, the world is now moving towards a future without this mass wealth inequality. Everyone is pretty equal around the world, no matter what country you live in. You have very similar opportunities, and the whole point of the War of the Elites was to, of course, get rid of the elites in the major countries, and that has had kind of a trickle-down effect into some of the more medium to small-tier countries, which are now doing away with the ultra-wealthy, late-stage capitalism stuff, and instead investing that money into all of their civilians equally. Now, while the world rebuilds, there's not going to be a whole lot of wars going on. I mean, that just kind of makes sense, right? You just got out of a major world conflict, one of the largest conflicts in history. Of course, all of the major powers aren't going to be going to war because they need to rebuild themselves. And even some of the smaller powers that felt the economical impacts of the war aren't going to be doing too much. So what happens internationally while every country starts to work on itself? Well, the Assembly of Nations is going to begin to federalize. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, currently there are a few major economic alliances across the world. There's the one in Western Europe, there's the one in Mesopotamia, there's India's, and then there's the one in Africa. The leaders of these economic alliances are all major powers, and they're all in the Assembly of Nations. India and South Africa were previous Security Council members. Of course, South Africa has their Triangle Alliance, and India has their Diamond Alliance. So the Assembly of Nations is going to make a decision. They're going to kind of integrate these economic alliances into the general structure of the Assembly. Now, what exactly does that mean? It just means that they are bounded by treaty through the Assembly of Nations. It kind of reinforces it, it holds it together better, it's more stable. And every single economic alliance in the world, every single major one that is presented on this map, will be integrating with the Assembly. Some countries are going to like that, and some countries aren't going to like that. The first economic alliance to be integrating with the Assembly will be the Economic Economic Alliance of Western Europe. There will not be an official leader of this alliance. It is once again integrated into the AN. There's no leader. It's just a council of countries coming together for their economic interests. And these are the founding members of the new Western European Economic Order. Some countries that may have previously been in it have either left because they feel like they don't want to federalize, or they have left because they need to reorganize some things and may join back later. And maybe some new countries have joined as well. I don't remember because this part of the map got destroyed in World War V. But that doesn't necessarily matter because it was going to be redone anyway. Next up is the Mesopotamian Economic Order, and every single one of these countries do stay in. So even though it's federalized, every single member decides to go along and stay in the alliance, probably because it's a very strong economic alliance. And just to highlight and demonstrate that thought, we even see the country of Persia go from India's economic alliance over to the Mesopotamian Economic Order. Now you might be wondering, why would Persia join this thing? Technically, they aren't at Old Empyrean, right? Well, actually, yes, they are. The invitation to the MEO extends to all nations with territory that was a part of the former Old Empire. So, for example, Persia had land that was once a part of the OE. They're allowed to join it because of that. You don't have to be a core nation, you just have to have land from that old empire. Anyway, India's probably not too happy about this because Persia was one of their biggest trading partners. It's not that they can't trade anymore, it's just that it's going to be a little bit more expensive. On the topic of India, their economic alliance is going to change as well. The new Diamond Economical Alliance will look something like this. It includes India, the tip of India, the purple country. Over here we have Bangladesh, the newly released country, orange Afghanistan, and then this part up here. Noticeably, 2 of these Central Asian countries decided not to rejoin, and that could be because they're more interested in the Mesopotamian one. But also, India's government didn't change after World War V. They're one of the only major powers that didn't have a major government change. Like, for example, we saw China and America's government change, and West Africa's government even underwent reform of some sorts. We saw Mexico get a new leader. Of course, Brazil's government got turned upside down. So really, it's only India and Russia that didn't experience any kind of regime change or anything like that. And some countries may still be skeptical about that because the people around the world and even the governments think that there might still be some play by the elites in India or the elites in Russia, which are a lot more prominently known than the elites in India. But India is kind of morphing away from the elitist thing. They, of course, after World War V, they made sure to do away with all the popular public figures and, to get that out of the way because they don't want a revolution. But still, it's important to note they didn't have a government change. Next up, we have the Horn of Africa Economic Alliance. This is certainly an interesting one because these 2 nations up here are not in the Assembly of Nations. However, the Golden Team is. And they were the ones that kind of founded this alliance and work it. So they're going to go to these 2 countries over here and they're going to make them join the Assembly of Nations. Well, they're not going to make them, but they're going to strongly encourage them to do so. And with the whole changing of world events and no longer there being a Security Council, these 2 nations will make the decision to join the AN, mostly because they were pressured to by the Gold Team. So they both get membership status and the economic alliance is federalized. We now move down to Africa, where this is going to get extremely interesting. All of these Southern African countries are currently in South Africa's economic alliance, which at this point isn't necessarily just South Africa's, it's more so of just the whole community of South Africa's economic alliance. Some of these countries have recently just joined the Assembly of Nations, like these 2 down here, so they might be skeptical to immediately federalize this economic alliance because they've been in it for a long time compared to being members of the AN. So let's see if there's any major map changes. And surprisingly, yes, there is a few. We have both the lavender and light blue countries deciding not to rejoin South Africa's economic alliance after it's federalized, and then also extends over to Tanzania, who does not rejoin. Now, there is a star right here, and this is the remnants of the Star Economic Alliance. That alliance fails to be federalized, and it's simply disbanded. Once again, we're not going to say that all economic alliances that aren't federalized just don't exist anymore. That's not what we're trying to get at. What I am trying to get at here, though, is that all of the ones that the AN officially recognizes and integrates will be highlighted on the map. And those are usually all of the major economic alliances. So even if there are some minor scale ones, like say, for example, and this isn't true, but say there's like an economic alliance in Central Asia, but it isn't federalized by the AN. It doesn't have a shape, but it is still there by word of mouth. So the Star Economic Alliance very well still could be kicking, although it's very unlikely. Anyway, we're now heading on over here to North America, where we have one last economic alliance to talk about, and that is the one that the Unitarians hold with their neighbors. And yes, it will be federalized as well. And that will look something like this when it's all said and done. So the members do stay the same: Alaska, the Unitarians, and the Pink Team, and then California is eventually re-added into that. And you might have also noticed that I have finally, 85 episodes in, decided to separate the military alliance layer and the economic alliance layer. So, yeah, good job me for taking 85 episodes to do that. Better late than never, I guess. Anyway though, enough about the economics, let's start talking about the military. So heading down to South America, a new military alliance is created. Now currently there are only two major military alliances in the world, the one that South Africa has with some of the northern neighbors up here, and then the one over here in Europe between Poland and Ukraine. Other than that, there's none. So a new one is created up here in the northwestern quadrant of South America between the Colombians, the Peruvians, and both of the Ecuadorian countries, although this one is more Brazilian than Ecuadorian, I think. So this Brazilian country. So they all come together to form the Anti-Brazilian Alliance. Of course, it's not going to be officially called that because that's kind of mean, but why do they need this? Well, they don't trust Brazil. Even though they were given a new democratic government and no longer fascist, Brazil is still a pretty strong country, even if they did have a few cities leveled to nothingness. We'll talk about that here in a second, if you were wondering. But Brazil is still the strongest country in South America, even after getting destroyed in World War V. And they don't want a repeat of history. These guys have been through a lot. So they come together to form this general military alliance, and there's even talks about forming an economic alliance. Anyway, as I was just alluding to though, what about the non-nuclear high-radius bombs that America had? Did the AN confiscate them? Yes, they did. Of course they did. All of America's supply of the NNHRBs has been taken by the Assembly of Nations to another country. That country does not have launch authority, but they're not too sure what to do with them yet because they want to study them, they want to understand them. America was the only country that had the technology to create the NNHRBs. They were trying to share it with India. Obviously that didn't go so well, caused the whole world war. So now the AN takes it to a country that is more likely than not Iceland, where they will be deactivated, studied, and America will be forced to give all of the information they have around those bombs over to the entire assembly floor. So technically the technology is available to everybody, but you're not allowed to make those bombs. One part of the World War V treaty was the banning of city-level bombs. A city-level bomb is something that has the capability to wipe out an entire city, vaporize an entire city. That's what the NNHRBs were. Brazil was the leading country to try to get this passed, and luckily the assembly did pass it unanimously. So bombs that wipe out entire cities are now banned. You cannot use that in conventional warfare. So that is now two branches of WMDs destroyed. You can no longer make nuclear bombs, and you can no longer make the non-nuclear high-radius bombs. No weapons of mass destruction here. Anyway, Libya just exploded. Okay, they didn't actually explode. But Libya is now undergoing a civil war. Now this might seem pretty sudden. We just got out of World War V. Libya was just fighting in World War V. Well, that's kind of the reason this is happening. Libya doesn't have an elite problem, but they sure do have a government problem. The people of Libya never wanted to get involved in World War V, however, they did, and that's because America had influence over their government. A lot of Libyans died in their invasion of Egypt. It was one of the most brutal front lines, believe it or not, in World War V, and that's because Libya just did not do a good enough job of training their troops, of having the logistics in place to ensure that the troops were safe, keeping them supplied with resources, including, food and water, stuff like that. Libya was a failure of a country in World War V, and that's kind of why we saw this front line get pushed back by Egypt until West Africa showed up. And while the government has just kind of doubled down, they're not going to do any kind of service honoring the troops that died in World War V, and that has a few groups and a few extremist groups in Libya very angry. Eventually, the leader of Libya will go ahead and declare martial law and declare himself the dictator of Libya in order to suppress all of the unrest in his country. That is the exact justification he gives, and according to the AN, this country is now a dictatorship. And that doesn't fly too well in this current era. Now, the AN itself will not be getting involved in Libya's civil war, and that's because the AN has restated their original statement. They are here to stop global war from happening. We are not going to get involved in internal affairs inside of countries. That is their own business. However, if you cross the line of humanitarian killing or just bad stuff to humans, we will get involved because that violates our treaty, that violates the convention. So do whatever you want, just don't kill your own civilians, or don't use chemical weapons, don't use nuclear bombs, etc. Anyway, let's talk about the civil war a little bit more. Faction 1, we have the areas of Libya which experienced the most fighting in World War V breaking away, and maybe not necessarily breaking away, but they are the opposing government forces hoping to overturn the government of Libya and reinstall a more democratic government, because this guy just declared himself a dictator. We don't necessarily want a dictator in Libya. That's what we're here for. Not only that, but we're also here to bring justice to those who died in World War V. We were the ones that were hit most by the fighting, and therefore we think we're the ones that are best suited to fix this. These are the most popular rebels in the country. They're supported by a lot of the major democratic countries around the world, like Greece and Ireland. Those countries won't be getting involved, but they will have their diplomatic support for them. The second group of rebels we have here are the ones down here. These are the extremist rebels. Not much is known about them other than the fact that they are wanting to form their own state and that they are opposing the current dictator of Libya because they do not agree on some fundamental ideals. These guys are more so terrorists than they are rebels. The definition of a terrorist definitely varies depending on who you're asking, but I guess in the modern sense of our world, we would call these guys terrorists. Maybe extremist would be a better word. Also, apologies if you're colorblind. You might not be able to see this because it's a red-green. I'm not, but this is really messing with my eyes, so maybe I am. I'll stop doing that before someone has a seizure. And then for our final group of rebels, we have the Yellow Rebellion up here in the northwest of the country. As you can see, there are very many fractured rebellious groups in Libya, and this civil war will be ongoing for maybe a few episodes. The central Libyan government is very disorganized, and the military doesn't know what to do with itself. Some of the militants are more loyal to the Eastern Rebellion. Some of them are even loyal to the Yellow Rebellion. None of them are really loyal to the extremists, but it's hard to choose sides when you know your government is wrong. Also, I didn't really talk about the Yellow Rebellion. It's pretty similar to that of the Eastern Rebellion, except they want to form their own state. They don't want to be Libyan. They are democratic, but they do share one view with the rebels down here, and that view is that the government of Libya, located in the darker red, doesn't represent their religion/ethnicity as much as it probably should. And I guess the best way to kind of like explain this is the divide between Shia and Sunni Islam. It is still Islam, just different variations of it. That's where the extremists are getting their justification, and that's why the yellow ones want to form their own country. And I do want to say, just for those of you who like to keep track of time in the series, I know that I no longer talk about time frames and how long something has taken place for, or how long like a time frame between world wars were. I've left that up to you guys for open interpretation, but I know some of you guys still want it said officially. So the federalization of the economic alliances happened within the first couple of months after World War V, and the Libyan Civil War happened around a year and a few months after World War V. So still kind of close to it, just not right after, about a year after the federalization of the economic alliances. So some countries at this point are doing a lot better than others in terms of rebuilding. America and China likely not, and definitely not Brazil. The countries that weren't super involved in World War V but were still fighting in it, like Norway for example, might be 100% again. On that same list of countries doing well is also Russia. Now at this point, the dictator of Russia is getting a little bit old, and when he finally croaks, guess who comes into power? His son. And guess what views that his son has? The exact same views. Kind of convenient for the Russian storyline here, but do remember, Russia is the most nationalistic country in Europe after the passing of Rome. Remember, there was a desire here by the people and government to reform the Russian Empire, as they call it, and they're taking the next step in that plan. The first thing that the former dictator's son does as leader is declare war on the dark gray country. Now you might notice that this isn't a former Russian country. In fact, it was a former Mesopotamian country, but it's pretty simple. The son here is a little bit smarter than his father. Taking all the land over here was nice and all, you know, your country's a lot, oh, that's a crater. But you have a lot more land in your country that could be used for farming, for resource gathering, so on and so forth. But in terms of actual value, there's a lot of other countries that you could go after that would have a lot more value. And the dark gray country is one of those guys. Access to the Black Sea is priority in this war, and Russian troops will begin to move in. Now, the dark gray country is not a part of any military alliance, but they are a part of the Mesopotamian economic order, which is a very, very strong economic alliance. In fact, it's the strongest economic alliance in the world. It's where the strongest currency is. And I guess on the topic of that, just real quick, I'm going to talk about currency. So the old Imperial countries, they all shared the same currency. It was the former old empire currency. They still use that, and the Assembly of Nations recognizes that as an official currency. The South African Economic Alliance does not use a common currency. Neither does the Horn of Africa one. The Western European one does, however. That is recently implemented with the federalization of the alliance. And then there's the Unitarian Economic Alliance. This one does not use a common currency. And then there's India's, which also no longer uses a common currency. So the only two alliances with the same currency is the Mesopotamian one and the Western European one. Back to the war over here in the dark gray country though. This war will be over very quickly. Russian forces have an extreme upper hand even after having to rebuild their country. They are on another level compared to this dark gray country. And Russia at this point is almost close to approaching the status of a top 10 power in the world. Military, that is. This country is eventually split into two, their capital city is encircled, and Russian forces are able to seize it. And not long after, we do see the surrender of this country. The peace treaty is pretty simple here. The dark gray country will cease to exist. Russia now has proper access to the Black Sea, something that the new dictator very, very much wanted for his country, but that did just stir up some tensions with the Mesopotamian countries, who are going to be putting some economic sanctions on Russia. Can an economic alliance do this? Well, yes, of course you can. Any country can do economic sanctions. It's just the efficiency of such depend on who's doing it, and like I've said many times now, the Mesopotamians have a very strong alliance going for them, so this will hurt the Russian economy. That doesn't mean, though, that these guys have lost a member of their alliance, and they could be looking to make it up elsewhere. Now, while we're still on the topic of Russia, the new dictator makes another decision. This one is a very interesting one, but it's one that the world is going to be very surprised about, and that is joining the Assembly of Nations. Yes, the Russians will no longer abstain. They will now officially join the Assembly and will be able to vote on all matters of international issues. Simply enough, this is a power play by the Russians. They want a voice in the international world, and this is how they're going to get it. I do believe at this point that they are the only authoritarian country other than Libya to be in the Assembly of Nations. Just because these guys are communist doesn't necessarily mean they're authoritarian, even if in real life most communist countries are. But this isn't real life, so yeah, anyway. We're now going to head over to Libya, where we have some movement on the front of the civil war. The extremists in the south have begun to connect up their borders, as all the groups that were previously not connected are now all connected. They were also successful in taking over this large piece of land down here near the border of the pink team. However, Libyan forces have begun to push them back over here in the far east, heading towards the core center of their little group. Now, these guys don't have a capital city because it's more of a terrorist network. Same thing with the yellow team up here. They don't really have a capital city, but there is technically one, or more so of a base of operations for the rebels over here, and that city is the one right here. So while we're on the topic of that, let's talk about their movement, which has mostly been just kind of reinforcing the area around this city. They don't want the Libyans to just blitz in and take it and throw out their temporary government. That would be very counterproductive. So they will work on securing land up here in the north, heading towards now the capital city of Libya. But of course, that's not going to be met so well. And the Libyans, of course, will be pushing back the rebel forces, trying to do much of what these guys are doing and secure their capital city. Now, Libyans will see a lot of success against this group over here in the middle over here. And the strategy with this is that you want to make sure that these guys never have full linkage, because that would make a very large front line that you don't necessarily want to fight. So the Libyans are kind of focusing their forces on wiping out this central one to kind of prohibit these guys from ever contacting up with these guys. Now, as for the yellow team forces over here, the Libyans will actually have the most success so far against these guys, as they wipe out almost all of this major group right here. In the meantime, while that was happening, though, they were able to connect up with the main group on the border of the Mediterranean country, and they were also able to push around this border and start to get close to the extremist in the south. Now, it isn't necessarily known just yet how the three rebel groups will interact with each other should they ever meet up, but it is known that these guys share a common interest, just not a common ideology, which is ultimately going to trump any kind of, religious interest. So it's theorized that these two probably wouldn't interact nicely with each other should their borders ever meet. Anyway, though, we're now going to head down to the southeastern quadrant of the world, over here, not to Red Australia, but over here to Indonesia. And here we're going to see the uniting of two countries. And those two countries are the red team and the green team. They will come together and form the Indonesian Union. However, they are very hesitant to give themselves a name because something else is happening behind the scenes. Indonesia has a very unique religion to itself, but also Indonesia doesn't really, I don't want to say they don't care about their religion / ethnicity, but they definitely aren't as super into it as some other countries are, like up north, for example, Vietnam, or even India. They share the same religion as India, but at this point it has evolved into its own branch of it. So to better represent that, I'm going to be changing the color of the religion map for the first time ever, probably. Not actually, but for the first time in a very long time, to better demonstrate that they have moved away from the original brown team religion that is in India and also down here in Africa. Additionally, at this point in time, more likely than not, we have seen Australia completely rid this continent of a majority of its kind of religion, and that more likely than not also extends out here to the island nation territories. Remember, this is a fascist country, so they're going to have a pretty fun time doing some fascist things, like getting rid of other people's religions. Now, a good portion of the western half is still this religion, although it is on its way out as the fascists take more and more control over this area. Anyway, though, back to the topic of Indonesia. Like I was saying, these guys aren't super religious. They're one of the least religious countries in the world, and yes, like I've said before, they do have their own branch of it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's super popular. So why was the new Indonesian government holding off on giving their country a new name and a new flag? Well, they definitely have interest in another concept, a new concept to the world, one which only appears in one other part of the world and is very far away from this one. But Indonesia is interested in the concept of Unitarianism. This country is one of the most stable and one of the most economically prosperous countries in the world. Quality of life here is also top-notch. Wealth inequality here, also top-notch. Basically, the Unitarians are the country to live in if you want to have a normal and balanced life. They're not like super strong militarily, they don't have a lot of influence, but they are a role model country. In a place like Indonesia, where your religious standings aren't really prominent and your ethnicity certainly doesn't matter, because remember, Indonesia at this point is made up of very many previous countries, is perfect for the concept of Unitarianism. Will it be able to be applied in this context? We'll have to see, but they're definitely working towards it. Anyway, that is going to do it for today's episode on What If Civilization Started Over. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We don't really have any more milestones to get to anytime soon, so I can't really say that we're trying to get to 200k because, well, we're here. But just know that we're always trying to grow our community. We're also always trying to reach these new milestones. The next major one is 250k. We'll probably hit that next year. After that, 300k. We'll probably hit that the year after, and so on and so forth. I want to give a big thank you to the Wixo community for staying by my side through 85 episodes now, which that also means that we're 15 episodes away from the finale. That's a little under 4 months from now. Kind of scary. But yeah, the support for this series has never waned, and I don't think it ever will, all the way up to its conclusion. If you're worried about what happens after Wixo, don't be, because I always have plans for the channel, and I have plans for what happens next. So I'm not going to confirm like a Wixo season 2 or anything. I'm not sure if I want to do that, but just know that if you do enjoy the storytelling that I have for these series and the lore that I give and just the general storylines that I have, then just know that you're not going to miss out after the series ends. There's going to be more. There's going to be another series of some sorts. Anyway, though, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for 200k. Once again, a video for that on Monday, and I will see you all on, well, Monday. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes Andrew O2, Chrono Apex, Omega the YouTuber, Terminator, Aiden Shank, Icy Static FN, See What I Do, CTG on YT, AdizzPro, Euroball, Bren, Jazzy Gerboa, Green France Mapping, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Vista, Nightenhood 7353, GNR95, Ozgeo, Big, A Norwegian, RS, and Golden Ball Mapping, Zalance, Laser Taze, Augusto, Pablo Sigma Cat, and Hammer Toad 45. Once again, thank you guys.